Hey, beautiful humans, welcome back to Wild Mind, Rooted Heart. I am really happy that you are here. And before we dive in today, I want to give you a little heads up. This episode is going to be longer than my usual ones. Normally, I try to keep things a little more bite-sized, but over the last few weeks, I've felt incredibly inspired. Life has been handing me so many moments that on the surface seem completely unrelated. But underneath them all, I've realized they're telling one much bigger story. So, if you're driving, folding laundry, out on a walk, painting, cleaning your house, or you just need something to sit with, I hope this can be that companion. And if you need to listen in a couple parts, that's perfectly okay too. This episode, like all of them, are not meant to be rushed. It's something I've been becoming for years. Over the last 13 episodes, you've gotten a little glimpses into my story. You've heard about nervous system healing, relationships, boundaries, creativity, fear, learning to trust myself. But today, I want to zoom out because I don't think any of those episodes exists by itself anymore. They are all connected. And lately, I've realized that while I thought I was recording a podcast about healing, I was actually documenting the process of becoming myself. I've noticed something really beautiful happening. The shifts that started quietly inside me, the ones nobody else could see, are beginning to ripple outward. I'm noticing different opportunities, different conversations, different relationships, different ways of showing up. And for the first time in a long time, it doesn't feel like I'm forcing life. It feels like life and I are finally walking in the same direction. So today's episode is my heart. It's my story. It's the patterns I've started noticing. It's the lessons I wish someone had told me years ago. And more than anything, it's an invitation. Not to become me, but to become more fully yourself. So let's begin. So a couple weeks ago, someone started asking me some of those deep questions that make you stop. Not because you don't know the answer, because you genuinely don't know how to anymore. Have you ever had someone ask, "So who are you?" Or "What do you want?" Or "What does your ideal relationship look like?" Years ago, I would have answered immediately. Not because I knew myself so well, but because I had an identity built from survival. I knew what I tolerated. I knew what I settled for. I knew what I thought love was. I knew what I thought I had to accept. I had answers, quick ones, automatic ones. But lately, people ask me some of those same questions and I pause. At first, I thought maybe that meant I didn't know myself. Now, I think it means something completely different. I think I'm no longer willing to answer from outdated versions of myself. The woman who would have answered those questions years ago, she doesn't live in the driver's seat anymore. And isn't that such a strange, beautiful place to be? Not lost, not found, but becoming. I think we spend so much of our lives trying to become finished. Like one day we'll wake up and think, there she is. I've arrived. I do have some of those feelings at times. But maybe healing doesn't work like that. Maybe healing isn't about becoming a finished masterpiece. Maybe it's becoming someone who's no longer afraid to repaint the canvas. Because if there's one thing life has taught me over the last few years, it's that every time I thought I was losing everything, I was actually being introduced to another version of myself. Leaving my federal job, leaving the apartment that held almost 6 years of my life with transformation and pain and growth. And I'll forever remember and be grateful for that space. Ending relationships, ending therapy, starting over, starting this podcast. Every single one of those moments felt like something was ending. And in a way it was, but looking back, every one of them was an introduction, not to a new life, to me. And I don't think that's talked about enough. People ask, how did you become more confident? Or how did you learn to trust yourself? And I wish I had some sexy, simple answer. I wish I could tell you I read one life changing book. I do have a few that I recommend. Or I attended one transformative breathwork class and suddenly became enlightened. I didn't. I became myself one courageous decision at a time. Not perfect decisions, not fearless decisions, just honest ones. And every honest decision handed me another piece of myself back. As you know from other episodes, I did a lot of that stuff, a lot of supporting and encouraging myself to step out of my comfort zone, to re explore the world and people and places and things, and explore what safety feels like and show myself that I am safe and I am becoming and am the woman that I've dreamt of. And it's just really, really beautiful. And there's something I've been thinking about a lot lately. Actually, maybe thinking isn't the right word. Because if you've listened to this podcast for a while or follow me on my socials, you know that my brain never really stops thinking. It's more like I've been noticing a pattern. And one of my favorite things in life is finding patterns. I used to dread them, but learning that it's a gift and a skill and being able to see or recognize things that people tend to miss, you can either be scared of it or you can be like, how do I work with this? That's my favorite phrase for all of this. Anything you recognize in yourself, how is the best way for me to work with it? But I do love finding patterns, not because I need everything to make sense, but because sometimes our lives are trying to tell us something long before we're ready to hear it. So for me, it's like helping save time. Because have you ever looked back and realized life had been teaching you the same lesson over and over, just with different people, different jobs, different cities, different friendships, different versions of yourself? The names changed, but the lesson didn't. And I think for a really long time, I believed healing meant finding the right relationships or the right therapist, the right career, the right apartment, the right routine. Like somewhere out there, there was a magical combination of circumstances that would finally make me feel finished, safe, home, and then life, being life, very lovingly looked at me and went, that's adorable. No, because every time I thought, could this be it? Life gently, or sometimes not so gently, asked, okay, now who are you without that? Who are you without that job? Without that apartment? Who are you without those relationships? Who are you without the identity you've been building and have built around survival? At the time, it definitely felt a little cruel, but looking back, it was one of the greatest gifts I've ever been given. Every single thing I lost forced me to discover something I couldn't lose: myself. And you know what's funny? I used to think becoming yourself was this huge dramatic moment. Like there'd be fireworks, music, a montage, maybe a bird landing on my shoulder, because apparently that's how transformation works in those Disney movies. But instead, it looked like plenty of times just crying in my car, starting over, packing boxes, second guessing myself, recording podcast episodes that maybe only a handful of people would listen to, painting when I couldn't find words, coloring because that is all the energy I had, going for walks, even when I feel like I didn't want to or couldn't move my body, writing voice notes I'd never send, choosing to stay curious instead of certain. Tiny things, tiny choices, tiny acts of courage. And eventually, those tiny choices became someone I actually recognized. The other day, one of my sisters finally had time to listen to my podcast. And if you have siblings, you know their compliments somehow hit differently because siblings don't usually hand those out like participation trophies. That is for sure. She sent me a voice note and she said a bunch of things, but what stuck out was that she was so proud of me. But she said, "You have to keep doing this. Do not stop." And then she said something I'll probably carry with me for the rest of my life because it made sense. It's something I have been trying to figure out. What is my purpose? What are my gifts? Like, what are the things that feel easy to me that I notice and recognize maybe other people struggle with? And so she said to me, "You have this way of taking really complicated things and making them feel simple." And I just sat there, I cried, allowed myself to feel seen and to hold this experience, which very recently as well, I had someone else explain how they see me. And again, it was very much like, what? I've been crying into the abyss for someone to say these exact words, like to me, without having to ask or to curate what it is that I need to be said to me. Like these things just came naturally to me. I had um, another family member a couple months ago message me like and say how proud she is of me, and it's just funny because it's my stepdad's family, right? Like, and I grew up with them. That's a whole complicated thing. But even in like the times of like extreme harm that I was in, life has always shown me love and shown me that that is possible. And I think that's why I personally have always tried to choose to lead with love and to not treat other people the way I've been treated. You know, that phrase of like treat people how you want to be treated is I took it literally. And regardless, more often than not, of how someone was treating me. Because a lot of times I can recognize people are just hurting. They're, you know, they're holding a lot of their own stuff. And this journey is not easy. I've wanted to quit and give up so many times. But another thing I learned from like talking out my thoughts and things in therapy is I was like, you know, my whole life I've searched for something to believe in. I searched through all different forms of religion, people, like so many things. And I was just, why not try believing? Why not try believing or trusting myself? And so back to what my sister had said, I don't think I knew that that is exactly what I was doing. I knew I was like trying to do that, but I wasn't sure if it was being received or not because it feels so natural to me. And looking back, I recognize how I've been able to break complicated things down and make them simpler for myself, whether it's something I had to remember, like in school, or just in general, when I'm breaking down like a problem or anything like that. It feels so natural to me. It's like breathing. I'm just trying to explain what I'm learning. And maybe that's the thing about our gifts. Sometimes the things we're meant to contribute to the world feel so ordinary to us that we assume everyone can do them, but they can't. Maybe your gift is making people laugh. Maybe it's making people feel safe. Maybe it's creating beauty. Maybe it's building businesses. Maybe it's noticing details nobody else sees. Maybe it's listening. Maybe it's teaching. Maybe it's loving. Whatever it is, it probably feels so natural that you've overlooked it because that's what gifts do. They don't usually arrive wearing a bright neon sign flashing, "Look at me." Sometimes they just quietly keep showing up, waiting for you to believe them. And that is when another realization hit me. This podcast was never just a podcast. Painting was never just painting. Writing was never just writing. Even coloring in silence was never just coloring. They were all forms of expression. And expression has quietly become one of the ways I've found my way back to myself and continue to do so. And I want to be really careful with how I say this because depression is real. Trauma is real. Mental health is incredibly complex. And I'm not saying expression fixes everything, it doesn't. There have been days where getting out of bed felt impossible, days where coloring was too much, days where painting felt heavy, and days where talking wasn't available to me. But what I have learned is this: whenever I was finally ready, expression became the bridge. Not because it erased what I was feeling, because it gave those feelings somewhere to go. It's one thing to carry grief around inside of your body, it's another to paint it, write it, speak it, dance it, sing it, cry it, plant it in a garden, turn it into a conversation, turn it into a podcast episode. Somehow, the moment we give our inner world somewhere to land, it stops asking us to carry all of it alone. And maybe that's part of why I keep coming back to this microphone. Not because I have life figured out, because every time I sit down here, I leave a little lighter than when I arrived. Not because I've solved my life, because I've expressed it. And maybe, just maybe, that's what healing has looked like all along. Not fixing myself, remembering myself. And you know what I find fascinating? How often we judge relationships based solely on whether they lasted. Almost like permanence is the only thing that determines value. We ask questions like, did it work out? Did you end up together? How long were you together? As if the length of a relationship somehow is proof of its worth. But what if that's the wrong question? What if instead we asked, who did I become because this person crossed my path? Because when I look back over the last several years, I don't see failures anymore. I see teachers. Some stayed for years, some stayed for months, some barely stayed at all. And somehow, every single one handed me something I couldn't have learned any other way. Not because they were perfect, not because they were always healthy, but because life has this incredible way of placing people in front of us at exactly the moment we're ready to learn a particular lesson. And here's something else I've been sitting with. I think we spend so much time trying to figure out who we're supposed to end up with that we miss appreciating who we're becoming along the way. There was someone I met during a season of my life when I had decided I want something different. Not perfect, not easy, just different. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for yet, but I knew I was just ready for something different. I'd reached this point where I realized I couldn't keep expecting a different life while making the same choices. And sometimes making a different choice isn't choosing the perfect situation. Yeah, sometimes it's simply responding different than you would have before. This person was incredibly honest with me from the beginning. Their life was messy. There were circumstances that made it clear this wasn't going to be a forever relationship. Years earlier, I probably would have either run away immediately or most likely convinced myself that I could somehow save the situation and this person. Those were my old patterns. Instead, I remember thinking, what if this doesn't have to become forever to still become meaningful? That was a completely new question because I wasn't abandoning my standards. I wasn't pretending reality didn't exist. I was simply allowing myself to learn and experience connection without forcing it to become my future. That was new. like really new, because I had spent so much of my life believing every meaningful connection needed to become permanent. If it didn't, it meant I had failed. But this time, something inside me softened. I thought, maybe this person is here to teach me something. Maybe I'm here to teach them something. Maybe that's enough. And do you know what happened? When that chapter naturally came to an end, of course I was sad. Of course I grieved. But I didn't lose myself. That was the miracle. Because for the first time, I realized I could love someone, appreciate someone, learn from someone, wish them well, and still come home to myself. That was one of the first moments I remember thinking, oh, wait, maybe secure attachment isn't about never losing people. Maybe it's trusting that if you do, you won't lose yourself too. That lesson would come back around again in a completely different way. Not through dating, but through therapy. You see, I had built this beautiful relationship with my therapist, a relationship that held so much growth, so much safety, so much witnessing. And then, because of circumstances completely outside of either of our control, it ended. Not because either of us wanted it to, not because the work was done. Life just lifed as it does. And I remember how heartbreaking it felt. Because grief doesn't care whether someone dies, moves away, changes jobs, or life simply shifts. Grief notices change. That's all it knows. But after the sadness settled, I realized something. She hadn't just helped me while we were together. She had helped me build something inside of myself that I could carry after she was gone. And isn't that what healthy relationships are supposed to do? Not make us entirely dependent on someone's presence, but strengthen something within us that continues growing even in their absence. I think that's true of great teachers, great friends, great therapists, great mentors, even great love. The healthiest relationships don't ask us to borrow someone else's strength forever. They help us remember our own. And then I started noticing something that honestly gave me chills. Every relationship, every chapter, every goodbye, every beginning was handing me another piece of myself. Life had scattered puzzle pieces across different seasons. One person helped hand me courage. Another handed me boundaries. Someone else handed me laughter. Someone reminded me what I would never tolerate again. Someone showed me what emotional safety could feel like. Someone reflected my creativity back to me. Someone challenged my beliefs. Someone expanded my world. But no single person completed me. They weren't supposed to. They simply carried one piece until I was ready to hold it myself. And when I realized that, something shifted. Because suddenly I stopped asking, why didn't this relationship last? And I started asking, what did this relationship awaken? Those are two completely different conversations. One keeps us looking backwards, the other keeps us growing forward. And here's the funny part, I don't think life is asking us to collect people. I think it's asking us to collect wisdom. People are simply some of the ways wisdom arrives. Sometimes through joy, sometimes through heartbreak, sometimes through the most unexpected conversations, sometimes through someone who was never meant to stay, but was absolutely meant to arrive. So, when someone asks me now, do you believe people come into our lives for a reason? My answer is different than it used to be. I don't know if every encounter is written in the stars. I don't know if every meeting is destiny. But I do know this. If I stay open, if I stay curious, if I'm willing to reflect instead of just react, then almost every experience has something to teach me. Not because life is trying to punish me, as I used to believe, but because life is constantly inviting me to become more fully myself. And maybe that's what growth really is, not becoming someone else, remembering who you've been underneath the fear all along. So, let's talk about a little elephant in the room you may or may not have noticed. There is some newness in my life. And no, this isn't about putting someone on a pedestal. This isn't about saying, I met the right person and now everything makes sense, even if it does a little bit. Actually, it's almost the opposite because I don't think they changed me. I think they reflected me. And those are two very different things. It's funny, when we meet someone who feels different, our first instinct might be to give them all the credit. They healed me, they changed me, they made me believe in love again. But lately, I've been asking myself, is that actually entirely true? Or did they simply walk into a version of me that had already spent years doing the work? Because here's what I know: they didn't leave my federal job, weren't there when I packed up nearly 6 years of memories from my apartment, wasn't there when I questioned who I was after leaving survival mode, wasn't there through the therapy, the tears, the painting, the lonely nights, the podcast episodes no one knew I cried before recording. He wasn't there for any of that. I was. And I do not say that to diminish him. I say it because I finally want to give myself the credit I've spent years handing to other people. Maybe that's something we all do. We meet someone during our bloom and accidentally thank them for planting the seed, when really the seed was planted years ago, quietly in the dark, when nobody was clapping and nobody was watching, when healing looked incredibly unglamorous. Growth is strange like that. Most of it happens underground, long before anyone notices the flowers. They can help your garden flourish, but I do think it's important to give yourself the credit where credit is due. And you know what else I realized? Sometimes people don't fall in love with a version of us they created. Sometimes they simply have the privilege of meeting us after we've done years of the invisible work. And that thought alone changes everything for me because it reminds me not to confuse timing with credit. Timing matters, but it isn't everything. I've had this battle for so long on my journey, especially when it comes to like romantic relationships of like, no, you have to wait this amount of time for this and this amount of time for that. And da, 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 da. I don't think so. I think it's all about one, obviously taking a leap, two, trusting that no matter what happens, you will be okay. The other person will be okay. Like, but at some point you've got to give into hope and you've got to give into the excitement that is underneath the layer of fear too, of the unknown and of possibility. And I have this quote on my laptop on a sticky note. I haven't even paid attention to it. I look at it every time I'm on my computer, but it's like uncertainty is where possibility lives. That's so true. But now, does that mean this is easy? Absolutely not. Actually, quite the opposite. Because here's the funny thing about healthy connections. Sometimes they don't activate our wounds because something is wrong. Sometimes they activate our wounds because something is finally different. Think about that. For years, maybe your nervous system learned that inconsistency was normal, that chasing was love, that anxiety meant chemistry, that proving yourself meant connection. So then someone comes along and they feel calmer, kinder, more emotionally available, more curious, more intentional. And suddenly, your nervous system doesn't relax, it panics. It may be a delayed response as well. So be mindful of that. If you're not someone who's used to being able to feel things right in the moment or process everything that you're feeling because you're trying to be very present and just live your life, but it panics, not because the person is unsafe, because safety may still feel unfamiliar. And that realization rocked me pretty good. Because one morning I woke up after this beautiful date feeling off. Not because anything had happened. Nothing bad had happened. Life was simply lifing. Schedules are busy. Responsibilities exist. The calendar looked the way it looked. And yeah, my mind started trying to write stories. I felt anxious. What if this is all it ever is? What if we only see each other when it's convenient? What if this was just about being intimate? What if I disappear now? Notice something? Every single one of those sentences started with, what if? Not, here's what happened. Not, he told me. Not, I know. Just, what if? And I caught myself. Not immediately, but way, way sooner than I would have years ago. Like within the same day of me recognizing this feeling. And I'm very, very proud of myself for that. But I realized my nervous system wasn't necessarily reacting to him, it was reacting to history. There's a difference. History has a loud voice. History likes to say, I've seen this movie before, except it hasn't. Not this version, not this cast, not this script, and not this chapter. History was trying to protect me using an old map. But here's the thing about old maps, they can tell you where you've been, but they can't really tell you where you're going. That doesn't mean I ignored what I was feeling. This is really important. Healing is not gaslighting yourself. Healing isn't saying, oh, I'm just triggered. My feelings don't matter. Did that come up? Yes, it did. I combated that and said, no, absolutely not. Because while I was sitting with everything that was coming up, I realized something I don't think I may have had words for before. Being triggered doesn't erase my needs. I'll say that again. Being triggered does not erase my needs. That lands in my body. Because for so much of my life, I thought I had to earn the right to have needs. I thought if I asked for reassurance, I was needy. If I asked for communication, I was too much. If I wanted consistency, I was clingy. So what did I do? I stayed quiet. I would let things slide. I swallowed my discomfort month after month, relationship after relationship, until eventually I'd hit a breaking point. And sometimes the other person would look at me completely confused because from their perspective, nothing had been wrong. How could they know? I'd never invited them into my inner world, and most of them weren't really that curious. I'd spent so much energy trying to not be too much that I became invisible to myself. And I don't want to do that anymore. Not because I want to control anything, not because I need constant reassurance, but because I finally realized healthy communication isn't saying, you need to fix my anxiety. Healthy communication is saying, can I let you into my world for a second? Can I tell you what helps me feel connected? Can I trust that if we're building something together, there's room for both of our needs? Do you hear the difference? One is control, the other is intimacy. And I don't think I've ever understood that distinction as clearly as I do now. And the more I think about it, the more I realize that almost every meaningful thing that's happened in my life began the exact same way. not with certainty, with curiosity. I didn't leave my job because I knew exactly what would happen. I left because I knew I couldn't keep betraying myself by staying. I didn't move because I had everything figured out. I moved because my life had become too small for the person I was becoming. I didn't start this podcast because I knew anyone would listen. Trust me, if you've been here since the beginning, you would know I have absolutely no idea what I'm doing. I am figuring this out along the way as I go. And that's how I'm choosing to live my life too. But I still don't know some days. The difference is now I don't think that's the point. Because somewhere around episode 13, something shifted. Not because I suddenly became a great podcaster, but because I stopped trying to sound like one. I stopped wondering, am I qualified enough? Articulate enough? Interesting enough? Healed enough? I simply started by just showing up. And isn't that funny? I almost quit this a few times. Not because I didn't love it, because I do, but because I wasn't immediately good at it and I did not feel confident. But how many beautiful things have we maybe abandoned because we expected ourselves to be experts before we were beginners? What if mastery isn't built on talent alone? What if it's built on staying? Staying through the awkwardness, staying through the self-doubt, staying through the tiny audience, staying through the days you question yourself. Not because every day feels inspiring, but because something inside you quietly whispers, keep going. Sister told me recently, don't stop. You have to keep going. You have to keep doing this. And hearing that from someone who's known me a big chunk of my life, it hit differently because she wasn't praising perfection. She saw something that had been growing long before I did. And maybe that's another reminder. Sometimes other people recognize our gifts before we do. The question is, will we believe them long enough to grow into them? I've always been someone who needed love, support, safety, encouragement, to feel seen. For a long time, I judged myself for that. I thought it meant I was dependent, weak, too sensitive. But I've been looking at it differently lately. Maybe being seen isn't the problem. Maybe starving for it was. There's a difference. Because when you spend your childhood or your life feeling unseen, of course your nervous system longs for witnessing. That's not broken. That's human. The difference now is that I am no longer asking someone else to build my worth for me. I'm allowing people to witness something I've already begun building myself and to be a part of that. And that changes everything because being witnessed is beautiful. Depending on someone else's gaze to exist is exhausting. And I've realized something else. I don't think courage is what we've been taught that it is. We imagine courage as a fear disappearing. Standing on a mountaintop, feeling powerful, certain, ready. But every courageous decision I've ever made felt terrifying. Leaving, beginning, recording, posting, moving, falling in love, trusting. Every single one came wrapped in uncertainty. Maybe courage was never the absence of fear. Maybe courage is choosing a life that feels true, even when certainty never arrives. And maybe that's why this conversation isn't really about relationships. Because whether we're talking about love, friendship, starting a job, a business, creating art, setting boundaries, moving across the country, ending something that is no longer aligned, the question underneath all of it is exactly the same. Am I willing to become someone I've never been before? Because that's the cost of every new chapter. You don't get a new life without becoming a new version of yourself. And here's the beautiful part. You don't have to know exactly who that version is yet. You simply have to stop pretending you're still the old one. And to understand and recognize that the old parts of you are still always going to be there. They may still pop up and in and out from time to time, but it's the fact that you don't have to hold yourself contained in those boxes. And I think that's why life keeps surprising me lately. Not because life suddenly became easier, because I stopped trying to control every outcome. Instead, I've started asking a different question. What is this trying to teach me? That one question can help change everything. A disappointing conversation? What is this trying to teach me? A beautiful connection. What is this trying to teach me? A goodbye? What is this trying to teach me? A creative spark that won't leave me alone. What is this trying to teach me? Suddenly, life stopped feeling like something happening to me, and it started feeling like something happening with me. Like I wasn't fighting the current anymore. I was learning how to float. And maybe that's what trust actually is. Not believing everything will go exactly as planned, but believing that no matter what happens, you'll continue becoming someone capable of meeting it. I think that's living, not waiting until you're fearless, not waiting until someone guarantees you'll never get hurt, not waiting until you're absolutely certain. Living is saying, my heart might break, my business might fail, I might have to begin again, and I'm going to love anyway. I'm going to create anyway. I am going to express myself anyway, because somewhere along the way, I realized the opposite of fear isn't courage, it's aliveness. If you've listened this far, first, thank you so much. Truly. Thank you for letting me think out loud. Thank you for letting me process life in real time. Thank you for growing right alongside me. Because the truth is, I don't record these episodes because I have all of the answers. I record them because every time I tell the truth, I find another piece of myself waiting there. And maybe that's why this podcast exists. Not to teach, not to fix, not to convince, but to remember. To remember that we're allowed to change. We are allowed to outgrow old stories. We're allowed to answer life's questions differently than we would have 5 years ago. We're allowed to discover that what once protected us may no longer be what helps us thrive. And maybe, most importantly, we're allowed to become. If there's one thing I hope you take from today's episode, it's this. The people you're waiting for may not be here to complete you. They may simply be here to witness the version of you that was quietly being built long before they arrived. Don't forget to give yourself credit for the invisible work. The tears nobody saw, the boundaries nobody applauded, the mornings you got out of bed when everything in you wanted to disappear, the art you created, the journals you filled, the therapy appointments, the walks, the uncomfortable conversations, the moments you chose yourself, even when no one else understood. Those moments matter. Those moments planted the seeds. So maybe expression isn't just something we do. Maybe expression is how we remember who we are. Maybe every painting, every journal entry, every podcast episode, every laugh, every tear, every honest conversation is another breadcrumb leading us home, but to the person we've been becoming all along. So this week, take the leap, send the message, paint the picture, apply for the job, record the podcast. Say, I love you. Say, I'm sorry. Say, that hurt. Say, this matters to me. Say something true. Because life has a funny way of meeting us the moment we stop hiding. And if you're waiting for certainty before you begin, you might accidentally spend your whole life waiting. Instead, choose curiosity, choose courage, choose expression, choose becoming, and choose you. As always, take what resonated with you and let what didn't simply settle back into the soil. Maybe it's not meant for today. Maybe it'll bloom when you're ready. Until next time, keep your mind wild, keep your heart rooted. And if life hands you a blank canvas, don't spend so long wondering if you're an artist that you forget to pick up the brush. We'll see you in the next one.